Imagine being named 70 times in a foundational religious text. Just think about that for a second. 70 times.
Yeah, it's a completely staggering number.
Right. I mean, that is actually more times than you'd be mentioned in the primary holy book of the religion that is literally built around your own son.
Exactly. It's a massive statistical anomaly when you really look at ancient literature.
And that is the textual reality of Maryam in the Qur'an. So welcome to the deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us for this one.
It's great to be here. The narrative focus in antiquity, I mean, it's almost universally male, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yet here we have a text that structuralizes a woman's name and her personal narrative at the very core of its theology.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in this really fascinating stack of sources to explore a figure who bridges worlds but is uniquely defined in Islamic tradition.
Yeah, we've got some great material to pull from.
We do. We're looking at classical Quranic exegesis. We've got this incredibly rigorous historical and theological essay from Smith College, and
That essay is fantastic, by the way.
so good. And we also have some really poignant modern reflections from platforms like Young Minds and the Yaqian Institute.
Right.
Our mission today is to unpack why Maryam, or Mary as she's known in English, is the only woman mentioned by name in the entire Qur'an.
And how her narrative completely upends our expectations.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because we aren't just looking at a historical timeline here. We are looking at a masterclass in resilience, psychological endurance, and divine boundaries.
And, to really grasp the magnitude of her life, we have to recognize that her disruption of the status quo began before she even took her first breath.
Wait, before she was even born?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Our sources point us to her mother, Hannah. The classical exegesis details how Hannah had been barren for years,
Right.
and one day she's just watching a bird feeding its chicks.
Such a small, everyday thing.
Exactly. But that simple, visceral display of maternal care sparks this desperate prayer for a child.
Yeah.
But it's what she promises in return that sets off a theological earthquake. She pledges the unborn child to the sanctuary in Jerusalem.
And she uses a very specific term for that, doesn't she?
She does. She uses the word muhoren.
Which is such a loaded word in this context. Muharraran literally translates to something completely freed or liberated, right?
Exactly, freed.
But the irony here is that she is liberating the child from worldly obligations, specifically so the child can be bound entirely to divine service.
Right.
She's pledging an unborn baby to the temple apparatus.
Precisely.
Right.
And that temple apparatus was, it was an impenetrable fortress of patriarchy.
Yeah, boys-only club.
Completely. Only males from specific lineages served in the sanctuary. They had total institutional lock.
Wow. So when Hannah gives birth and realizes she has a daughter, her reaction is really telling. She says, "My lord, I have delivered a female."
And people usually read that as her being disappointed.
Right.
Or apologizing. Yeah, it's often misread as an apology. But it isn't an apology at all. It is a stark realization of the sociological barrier she just hit.
She's realizing the male is not like the female because the male has institutional access.
Exactly. But then the text bypasses that patriarchal gatekeeping entirely. The divine response is a, quote, goodly acceptance of this girl.
I love that. It's like breaking a theological glass ceiling.
That's a great way to put it.
The institution might say no, but the divine says yes. She names her Maryam, which means servant of God, and she is accepted into the inner sanctum.
It completely bypasses the traditional hierarchy. And the establishment, they definitely feel it too.
Oh, I bet they did.
Because suddenly all these seasoned temple elders are arguing over who gets to be the guardian of this uniquely accepted child.
Right, because it's a huge honor now.
Yeah, the sources mention the casting of lots using their pens, the aqlam. They are literally throwing their writing implements into the water to see which one floats against the current.
That is wild, just desperate for the prestige of raising her.
Exactly. And the guardianship eventually falls to the prophet Zechariah.
Okay, so she's got a prophet raising her.
Yes, but the traditional power dynamic between guardian and ward is almost immediately inverted once she is situated in her private prayer chamber, the mihrab.
Because Zechariah, the elder, the established prophet, is the one being constantly stunned by her.
Constantly.
He walks into her secluded chamber and finds her with out-of-season fruit. Like, summer fruit in the dead of winter, winter fruit in the blazing summer.
An impossible provision.
And her response to his bewilderment is just, it's the foundation of her entire psychological profile moving forward.
Yeah, she simply states, "It is from Allah. Surely Allah gives whom He wills without measure.
Just completely unfazed.
Completely. And this isn't just a miraculous party trick, you know? This intentional solitude in the sanctuary is an apprenticeship in absolute reliance.
She's building a reservoir of trust in the unseen.
She is. And she is going to desperately need it, because her isolation is about to become terrifyingly absolute.
Which brings us to the encounter that fractures reality as she knows it. The Annunciation.
Right?
She withdraws to an eastern place and sets up a physical screen for complete seclusion.
Absolute privacy.
And into that intensely private, deeply protected space, the spirit appears to her in the form of a perfect, flawless man.
The intrusion into her sanctuary is absolute.
And her immediate reaction reveals everything about her character.
It really does. She doesn't swoon. She doesn't freeze in passive submission like you might expect in old stories.
No, she exhibits this aggressive taqwa, this profound, active God consciousness.
Yeah, she immediately says, I seek refuge in the most compassionate from you, if you fear God.
Just think about that. She is entirely alone with a strange man who has breached her secure environment, and her first instinct is to invoke the ultimate authority.
She's effectively saying, if you have any moral compass, any fear of the divine, you will back off.
It is a formidable assertion of boundaries.
It is.
Yeah.
And it forces the spirit, Jibril, to immediately de-escalate the situation, clarifying that he is merely a messenger.
Right, he's like, whoa, I'm just here to deliver a message.
Exactly. He announces the gift of a pure boy.
And Maryam's response to this is purely analytical.
Completely logical. She asks the obvious biological question, how can I have a son when no man has touched me, nor am I unchaste?
And this is where the Smith College essay in our source stack provides some brilliant comparative analysis.
It really does a great job outlining the theology here.
The Qur'anic narrative draws a massive, uncrossable theological line right here. The angel's response is that this creation is simply easy for the divine.
Right.
The text emphasizes that the conception is enacted via the word, or kalima, and the spirit, ruh. It is the direct divine imperative, be or kun.
And the Smith College piece meticulously details how this specific phrasing serves a dual purpose.
How so?
Well, it validates the miraculous virgin birth, obviously, but it acts as a firewall against the Christian concept of Mary as the Theotokos, the God-bearer.
Yes. The text is ruthlessly clear that she is fully human and she's carrying a fully human prophet.
Exactly. The Qur'an even goes out of its way later to note that both she and Isa, Jesus, used to eat food.
Right, it grounds them in biological necessity, like they needed to eat to survive.
It elevates her as the absolute pinnacle of human devotion, but strictly prohibits any deification. The boundaries of the theology are ironclad.
They really are.
But, while the theology protects divine oneness, we have to look at how this event leaves Maryam profoundly unprotected sociologically.
Oh, this is the part that always gets me.
When you compare this text to the biblical accounts, there is a gaping, undeniable omission in the narrative structure.
Where's Joseph?
Exactly.
There is no Joseph in this text. No fiancé, no secret protector, no male figure to absorb some of this social shockwave.
None at all. She's entirely on her own.
I really want to pull on this thread because the total absence of a male protector completely alters the emotional physics of this story.
It changes everything.
In a hyper-patriarchal first-century Judean society, a pregnant, unmarried woman isn't just facing neighborhood gossip.
Well,
she is facing absolute ruin.
She is facing a catastrophic cultural transgression. The temple service she was dedicated to demanded absolute purity.
Right, and by becoming pregnant, she hasn't just broken a religious rule.
She has shattered the foundational social contract of her entire community.
Wow.
Without a husband to offer even a veneer of social acceptability or physical protection, she is entirely exposed to the wrath of a deeply conservative society.
Which inevitably pushes her to the absolute limits of human endurance.
You can't even imagine the stress.
The weight of that social terror, combined with the physical agony of labor, forces her into hiding. She withdraws to a remote place.
Far away from anyone who could see her.
And the text captures this visceral descent into pain as she is driven to the trunk of a palm tree.
And here the Qur'an records a moment of pure, unvarnished despair.
Yeah.
In the throes of agonizing labor, isolated and terrified, she cries out, "Would that I had died before this and was a thing forgotten." Utterly forgotten.
It is such a jarring sentence to read in a holy book.
It really is.
Because, you expect religious texts to polish the edges of their saints, right? To make them stoic and endlessly patient.
Always smiling through the pain.
Exactly. But wishing for death. Wishing to be entirely erased from existence. Why does a text focused on divine guidance intentionally spotlight a moment of absolute crushing despair?
Because the text is validating the reality of human trauma.
Wow.
If you look at the Syriac apocryphal texts from antiquity, like the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew,
Okay.
they often portray her experiencing a completely painless, almost magical birth.
Really? Like no pain at all?
Right. The theological logic there was that pain was a punishment for Eve's original sin, and Mary had to be exempt from that.
Ah, I see.
But the Quranic narrative vehemently rejects that gloss.
Eh.
It insists on her physical agony. It insists on her mental collapse.
I was actually reading the Young Minds reflection in our source stack, and this exact point is what the author latched onto.
Oh, the young woman dealing with anxiety.
Yes. She's a young Muslim woman dealing with severe anxiety, and she points out that the text doesn't censor Maryam's depressive episode or her suicidal ideation.
It's all right there on the page.
She writes incredibly movingly about the, quote, heavy irony of being judged by people who don't know your struggle.
That's a powerful quote.
Finding that raw, desperate cry preserved in a text of eternal guidance was profoundly validating for her.
I can imagine.
It's like a 7th century acknowledgement that deep, authentic faith does not make you immune to severe mental health crises.
And that psychological validation is a crucial takeaway here.
Yeah.
The text communicates to the listener, to you, that hitting your absolute breaking point is not evidence of divine abandonment.
It's just part of being human.
It is simply part of the human condition. And it is precisely at the bottom of that abyss that the intervention occurs.
But the nature of that intervention is deeply instructive, isn't it?
Very much so. A voice calls out from below her, "Do not grieve."
And suddenly, 2 incredibly practical miracles are provided.
Right, practical is the key word.
A stream of water appears at her feet to cool her, and she is instructed to shake the trunk of the massive palm tree so that fresh, ripe dates will drop down to her.
And notice the underlying mechanism here.
A shaking of the tree.
Yeah. The divine easily could have manifested those dates perfectly pitted and placed them directly into her hand.
True.
But the command requires her to participate in her own rescue.
Yeah.
This introduces the concept of amal, which is effort or action intertwined with faith.
It's the ultimate lesson in causality. It's like turning the key in the ignition of a car, right?
That's a perfect analogy.
The engine, the divine miracle, is doing all the impossibly heavy lifting, but you still have to physically reach out and turn the key.
Exactly.
I mean, asking a woman in the final stages of labor to physically shake a thick palm tree trunk defies logic. It's like asking her to do yard work while giving birth.
It sounds absurd on the surface.
But shaking that tree was her turning the key. She had to take an action, however minuscule compared to the result, to activate her healing.
And when you look at the biological reality of that specific provision, the blend of the supernatural and the scientific is just fascinating.
Oh, the dates?
Yes, the text specifically mentions rutab, which are fresh, ripe dates.
Right.
Modern endocrinology and obstetrics tell us that dates are densely packed with natural sugars for rapid energy replenishment.
Which she desperately needs.
But more importantly, they contain oxytocin-like substances.
Right. They literally help stimulate uterine contractions, ease the later stages of labor, and significantly reduce postpartum hemorrhage.
It's incredible.
So it isn't just a random sweet treat. It is highly specific, biologically optimized medicine for a woman who has just given birth.
The text bridges the gap between divine providence and biological mechanics seamlessly.
Which is exactly what she needs, because that physical and hormonal stabilization is preparing her for the most dangerous phase of her journey.
The return to society.
The moment of vindication. She returns to her town carrying the infant, and the societal backlash is immediate and vicious.
They don't hold back at all.
No, the community surrounds her and weaponizes her own pristine lineage against her. They say, "Oh, Mary, you have certainly done an outrageous thing. O sister of Aaron, your father was not an indecent man, nor was your mother unchaste."
It's brutal.
They are essentially saying, you come from a noble, pure family, and you have dragged our entire legacy through the mud.
They have operated as judge, jury, and executioner before she even takes a breath.
But Maryam deploys a strategy she was divinely instructed to use during her labor.
The fast of silence. Psalm.
She doesn't offer a defense. She doesn't scream her innocence. She simply points to the child.
He just points.
See, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
Looking at it through a modern lens, this vow of silence feels almost, I don't know, deeply uncomfortable.
How so?
Well, we live in an era of the clapback.
Right, right.
If someone attacks your character, your brand, your reputation, the modern instinct is to aggressively defend yourself, bring the receipts, and outshout your critics.
That's definitely the culture today.
By choosing silence, isn't she just surrendering the narrative to her abusers? It feels incredibly passive.
I see why you'd say that, but it only feels passive if you assume the critics are acting in good faith.
Oh,
But they aren't. Her community has already convicted her.
that's true. They already made up their minds.
Any verbal defense she mounts, if she said, "An angel visited me, this is a miraculous birth," it would instantly be weaponized further as blasphemy or insanity.
They just call her crazy.
Exactly. The fast of silence is the realization that engaging with bad faith critics is a trap.
Ah.
It drains your energy, and it legitimizes their right to question you. By refusing to speak, she completely starves them of the engagement they crave.
Wow, so it's a profound stoicism.
It's the ultimate power move. She's handing the jurisdiction of her defense over to a higher authority.
She's basically saying, you aren't worth my breath. Take it up with management.
It's exactly.
And the community is enraged by this. They mock her, saying, how can we talk to an infant in the cradle?
They think she's mocking them.
And that is when the impossible happens. The infant Isa speaks.
But pay very close attention to what the infant says, because it perfectly encapsulates the theological boundaries we discussed earlier.
How does it compare to other texts?
Well, in Christian apocryphal texts like the Arabic infancy gospel, the baby Jesus speaks from the cradle and explicitly declares his divinity, identifying himself as the Son of God, the Logos.
Right.
But the Qur'anic narrative strips all of that away.
The baby Isa speaks with perfect clarity, and his very first words are, I am truly a servant of Allah. He has destined me to be given the scripture and to be a prophet.
He establishes his humanity and his prophetic mission immediately.
But then he delivers the line that matters most in that moment.
The crucial line.
He says, and he has made me dutiful to my mother.
It is an absolute, undeniable clearing of her name.
It really is.
He doesn't just declare his own status. He validates her purity in front of the very people trying to destroy her.
It is a mic drop that echoes through history. Which brings us to how Islamic tradition categorizes her ultimate legacy. Because she survives this crucible, she is granted the highest possible honors.
He is.
The Qur'an officially titles her Siddiqa, which translates to the truthful. And that is a rank of faith positioned just beneath prophethood itself.
Though, if we look at the medieval academic scholarship in our sources, there was actually a fierce, highly nuanced debate about whether she was, in fact, a full prophetess.
Yes, the debate between scholars like Ibn Hazm and the majority consensus represented by Ibn Kathir.
It's a fascinating theological argument.
Ibn Hazm forcefully argued that she was a prophetess, and his logic is brilliant. He argued that since angels appeared directly to her and delivered divine decrees regarding the future, she meets the technical definition of receiving revelation.
Right.
Therefore, she holds the rank of a prophet.
It's a highly structural argument, but the majority of scholars pushed back against this classification.
Why? Just to diminish her?
No, not to diminish her at all, but to protect the theological definition of prophethood.
Oh, I see.
Ibn Kathir and others argued that prophethood fundamentally requires public preaching, leading a community, and delivering new religious law.
Which Maryam didn't do.
Right. Since her journey was characterized by profound internal devotion and solitary trials rather than public law-giving, they maintained her title as Siddiqa.
But, stepping back from the intense medieval theological semantics of whether she gets the official title of prophetess,
Yeah.
doesn't that debate kind of miss the forest for the trees?
Dude.
To me, her real power isn't in an untouchable elite classification. Her power is her profound relatability.
Oh, absolutely.
She is a human woman who is forced into a terrifying, unfair social meat grinder, and she survived it. And not through magic, but through pure, agonizing trust and proactive resilience.
I think you've hit on the exact reason she remains such a potent figure.
Yeah.
Regardless of the academic classification of her rank, the ultimate validation comes from the Prophet Muhammad himself. He named Maryam as one of the 4 perfected women of paradise, standing alongside his wife Khadijah, his daughter Fatima, and Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh.
She is the archetype of completed faith.
Exactly.
So when we synthesize all these sources, the exegesis, the historical comparisons, the modern psychology, what does this deep dive mean for you listening right now?
That's the big question.
Maryam's narrative is a blueprint For single mothers facing the crushing weight of societal judgment, she is the ultimate beacon of vindication.
Definitely.
For anyone drowning in a chaotic, hyper-connected world that demands constant performance, her time in the sanctuary is a model for intentional solitude.
The necessity is stepping away to build your internal core.
Exactly. To map the journey we've taken today, we started with a dedicated child breaking institutional barriers in the sanctuary.
We followed her as she grew into an isolated, terrified mother driven to the brink of death.
And we watched her emerge as a vindicated, perfected archetype of human endurance.
Her story refuses to sanitize the reality of human pain, but it demands proactive resilience in the face of it.
You are absolutely allowed to feel despair. You are allowed to hit your breaking point.
But when the time comes, you must reach out and shake your palm tree.
Beautifully said. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, incredibly provocative thought to mull over. A piece of the puzzle we haven't explicitly connected yet.
Oh, this is a great point.
Think all the way back to her time in the mihrab, the sanctuary, when she was just a young girl receiving that out-of-season fruit.
Right, the impossible provision.
The sources note something beautiful about that moment. Witnessing Maryam's quiet, impossible blessings, witnessing her absolute trust in the divine provision, is exactly what finally pushed the elderly prophet Zachariah to make a seemingly impossible prayer of his own.
He prayed for a child despite his old age.
And that child became John the Baptist.
Her private, silent devotion in a locked room was the exact catalyst for his public miracle.
Which means your private resilience, the quiet endurance you maintain when absolutely no one else is looking, might be the exact catalyst someone else needs to finally believe in their own miracle.
That's incredibly powerful.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.